Hello everyone, welcome to Homework Help. If you find the videos useful, please subscribe to the channel. So in this video, we'll solve this problem based on the concepts of polynomial functions. So in this problem, we have to answer these 5 questions for these 3 graphs. So let's start with this graph here on the left side. So the first question is, does it represent a power function of even degree or odd degree? Explain. So this graph represents an odd degree power function. This graph starts from quadrant 3 on the left side and crosses the x-axis and ends into quadrant 1. So it's going across the x-axis from left to right. So that's why it's an odd degree. So this is a very important concept you need to understand and memorize. The second question is, state the sign of the leading coefficient. Now in this case, since it's going across up from left to right, so the leading coefficient is positive. And the reason is that it's going up across from left to right. Now we have to state the domain and the range. So as you know, domain is for x values. So this graph spans the whole x-axis from left to right. So the domain is from negative infinity to positive infinity. And then the range is for y values. So this graph spans the whole y-axis from negative to positive. So the range is from negative infinity to positive infinity. Now we have to identify an asymmetry. This graph has point symmetry because if we rotate this graph about the origin 180 degrees, it will overlap the graph. So it will come into the same position, or we'll get the same graph. So that's why this graph has point symmetry. So there's a very important concept you need to understand and memorize. And now we can describe the end behavior. So end behavior can be described in 2 ways. So in terms of quadrants, the end behavior is from quadrant 3 to quadrant 1 because the graph goes across in the upward direction from left to right. The other way to describe the end behavior is in terms of limit. So as x approaches negative infinity, y approaches negative infinity. Because as we go on the left side, the graph keeps going down, so it approaches negative infinity. Now for the right side, so as x approaches positive infinity, y approaches positive infinity. So this is the end behavior in terms of the x and y values on the extreme left and extreme right. So as we go on the right side, the graph keeps going up. So these are the answers for the first graph. Now we can answer the questions for the middle graph. So does it represent a power function of even degree or odd degree? So this is an odd degree because the graph goes across from left to right across the x-axis. So in this case, the graph on the left side starts in quadrant 2 and goes across the x-axis and ends in quadrant 4. So that's why it's odd degree. Now we have to write the sign of the leading coefficient. So in this case, the sign of the leading coefficient is negative because the graph is going down from left to right. Now the domain of the graph, so the graph spans the whole x-axis from left to right. So the domain in interval notation is from negative infinity to positive infinity. And the range is from again negative infinity to positive infinity, because the graph spans the whole y-axis from bottom to top. Now this graph has point symmetry, because if you rotate this graph about the origin 180 degrees, you will get the same graph. So that's why this graph has point symmetry. And now we can describe the end behavior. So in terms of quadrants, so the end behavior will be from quadrant 2 to quadrant 4. Now in terms of x and y values, so we can explain the end behavior as x approaches negative infinity, y approaches positive infinity. That means as we go on the left side, the graph keeps going up. So that's why it's positive infinity. And then as x approaches positive infinity, y approaches negative infinity. That means as we go on the right side, the graph keeps going down. So that's the end behavior for this middle graph. Now we can answer these questions for the third graph. Now this graph represents an even degree function, because this graph starts and ends on the same side of the x-axis. So the graph on the left side comes from quadrant 3 and then turns back and ends up in quadrant 4. So that's why this is an even degree graph. So it stays on the same side of the x-axis. Now the sign of the leading coefficient here is negative, because the graph is starting and ending below the x-axis. So the leading coefficient is negative. Now the domain will be from negative infinity to positive infinity, because the graph spans the whole x-axis. From the extreme left, it goes all the way to the extreme right. Now the range of the graph is limited from negative infinity to 0, and 0 is included in the range because the graph starts from the negative infinity on the y-axis but doesn't go above 0, it stops at 0. So that's why 0 is included in the range, and for infinity we always use the parentheses, not the square brackets. Now the symmetry, this graph has line symmetry. So as you can see, the y-axis breaks up this graph into two overlapping or mirror images. So that's why this graph has line symmetry. And now the end behavior. Now this graph's end behavior in terms of quadrants is from quadrant 3 to quadrant 4, because the graph starts in quadrant 3 on the left side and ends in quadrant 4 on the right side. Now we can describe the end behavior in terms of the x and y values. So as x approaches negative infinity, y approaches negative infinity, because on the left side, as the graph goes to the left, the graph keeps going down. Now on the right side, as x approaches positive infinity, the graph goes down on the right side as well. So y approaches negative infinity. So as you can see, as we keep going to the right side, the graph keeps going down. So I hope you'll find this video useful. Please share it, like it, and subscribe to Homework Help. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Bye.